Ellie Greenwood, with her life packed into a few worn suitcases, rolled into the village of Silverwood just as the sun dipped behind the dense, towering pines that fringed the old town. The village, known for its folklore and picturesque scenery, seemed a world away from the bustling city she had left behind. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of wood smoke and the faint, almost imperceptible, musk of wild animals. As Ellie drove down the main street, the cobblestones echoed under her car's tires, each building casting long shadows in the twilight. The locals, a few who lingered outside the quaint shops and rustic homes, gave her curious, albeit friendly, nods. Silverwood was smaller than she expected, with each home and shop meticulously cared for, flowers blooming in boxes even as fall approached. Her new home was at the edge of the village, a charming cottage that had once belonged to the school's previous teacher. The real estate agent had told her it was perfect for someone looking to escape the city noise, and indeed it was, nestled against the backdrop of the forest with a view of the mountains in the distance. As Ellie unpacked, Mrs. Dalloway, her elderly neighbor, came by with a basket of freshly baked bread and jam. "Welcome to Silverwood, dear. You'll find it quiet here, mostly," she said, with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "But don't you mind the stories? Every place has a few ghosts, doesn't it?" Ellie laughed, accepting the basket. "I've heard a little about the local legends." "The Howler, isn't it?" she asked, intrigued by the hints of supernatural woven into the village's tapestry. Mrs. Dalloway's smile faltered slightly, and she glanced towards the forest. "Ah, yes, the Howler. Just stories to keep the kids from straying too far into the woods when the moon is full. But between us, it's best not to pay it any mind. Enjoy the peace here, Ellie. And the quiet." As dusk settled into night, Ellie sat by her new fireplace, the crackle of the fire blending with the distant, unmistakable howl of something deep within the woods. A chill ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from the realization that not all tales were mere stories. Outside, the full moon began its ascent, casting a silver glow over Silverwood, and Ellie's new life quietly intertwined with the mysteries of the village. As the days slipped by in Silverwood, Ellie found herself settling into the gentle rhythm of village life. She started her new job at the local school, where her pupils were eager and bright, often more knowledgeable about the woods and their secrets than the textbooks on their desks. The days were filled with laughter and learning, and the evenings were quiet, often spent with a book by the fire. But as the end of the month neared, Ellie noticed a subtle change in the air and in the demeanor of the villagers. The full moon was approaching, and with it, an undercurrent of tension that seemed to permeate the village. It was almost imperceptible at first, the way conversations would halt as the moon's face was mentioned, or how plans would be quietly adjusted. Ellie observed that silver trinkets, which she had initially thought were mere decorations, appeared prominently in every home and business, polished to a gleam. One evening, while picking up supplies at the local market, Ellie overheard two old men speaking in hushed tones. "It's been 3 years since the last sighting," one said, eyeing the sky with a wary glance. "But you remember how it goes. Best to be prepared." Curious, Ellie approached the village librarian, Mr. Thorne, the next day. He was a repository of local history and seemed more willing than most to discuss the Howler. In the quiet of the library, amidst books and the musty scent of old paper, Mr. Thorne shared more of the legend. "The Howler, you see, is not just a wolf, nor a man, but something in between," he explained, his voice lowering to a whisper. "Every full moon, it's said to emerge from the heart of the forest. Some say it's a curse from long ago, others believe it's a protector of some ancient secret of the woods." Ellie listened, fascinated and skeptical in equal measure. "Has anyone ever seen it? What does it do?" Mr. Thorne glanced around before continuing. "Oh, there have been sightings. Torn livestock, deep gashes on tree trunks, and unearthly howls that chill the bones. The old folk say it's best to keep indoors, with silver at the threshold." That night, as Ellie lay in bed, the village's eerie quiet was more pronounced than ever. She found herself straining to hear beyond the usual night sounds, half expecting to catch the echo of a howl. Sure enough, just as she began to drift off to sleep, a long, mournful howl cut through the night, so clear and close it seemed to vibrate the very air. The next morning, the village was abuzz. Ellie noticed that many of the villagers looked tired, their eyes darting nervously towards the dense tree-line that bordered the village. Something had shifted overnight, and as she walked to school, Ellie felt the weight of dozens of wary eyes on her. The tales of the Howler were no longer just quaint village lore, they were a chilling reality that Ellie could no longer ignore. As the howl echoed in her mind, she realized that her curiosity had turned into a resolve to understand what lurked in the shadows of Silverwood. In the days following the haunting howl, Ellie's intrigue about the Howler transformed into a palpable concern. Conversations at school were tinged with apprehension, and Ellie noticed her students were less boisterous, their usual playfulness dampened by the grown-ups' whispered fears. It wasn't long before Ellie witnessed the tangible consequences of the Howler's presence. She was awakened early one morning by the sound of urgent knocks at her door. Standing on her doorstep was Mr. Hargrove, the local farmer, his face etched with worry. "Miss Greenwood, you'd best come see this," he said, his voice shaky. Reluctantly, Ellie followed him to his farm, a short walk from her cottage. What she saw took her breath away. The livestock pens were demolished, the ground torn up as if by giant claws. Worse still, several of Hargrove's sheep were brutally killed, their injuries savage and unlike any predator's work Ellie had ever seen or heard of. The village was soon abuzz with activity and fear. At the town hall meeting that evening, the room was thick with tension. The villagers gathered, many armed with old rifles and wearing silver pendants. The mayor, a stern woman named Mrs. Whitlock, addressed the crowd. "We've been fortunate these past years," the Howler had kept to the shadows. "But it's clear we're not safe anymore," she announced. "We need to protect our homes, our livestock, and our way of life." Plans were quickly made for a night watch and patrols around the village perimeter. Ellie, despite being new to the village, felt a duty to participate. She was given a crash course in firearms safety and handed a rifle with silver-tipped bullets, supposedly the only metal that could harm the beast. As night fell, the atmosphere in Silverwood was charged with a mix of fear and defiance. Ellie joined the first patrol, walking the edge of the forest with Mr. Thorne and a few other villagers. The forest, usually a chorus of nocturnal sounds, was eerily silent, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath. Hours passed without incident, but as the moon reached its zenith, a deep, resonant howl shattered the silence. It was closer than ever before, causing the patrol group to tense. The trees rustled, and a large, shadowy figure emerged at the forest's edge. It stood on two legs, its form massive and imposing, with eyes that glowed an unnatural silver in the moonlight. The group froze, caught between terror and fascination. Ellie, her heart pounding, raised her rifle but her hands trembled. The creature's gaze seemed to meet hers, a strange intelligence in its eyes that made her hesitate. It was both more and less than a beast, a creature caught between myth and reality. Before anyone could react, the Howler turned, disappearing back into the darkness of the woods with supernatural speed. The encounter was brief but left a lasting impression on Ellie. She realized this creature was not just a mindless predator but perhaps a being with its own story, fears, and possibly, suffering. The night ended with the villagers more unsettled than ever. Ellie lay awake, pondering the enigma of the Howler. The line between her role as an educator and protector blurred, and she knew she couldn't ignore the deeper mysteries of Silverwood. Her resolve hardened. She would uncover the truth of the Howler, not just for her safety, but perhaps for the creatures as well. The encounter with the Howler left Ellie with more questions than answers. As the sun rose over Silverwood, casting long shadows through the misty morning air, the village slowly stirred back to life. Despite the light of day, the tension from the night's events lingered like a thick fog. Ellie spent the morning at the school, but her thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the mystery of the creature she had seen. Determined to find answers, Ellie visited Mr. Thorne at the library after school. He greeted her with a knowing look, as if he had been expecting her return. "You're here about the Howler again, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low. Ellie nodded, and together they pored over old maps and books, tracing the history of sightings and attacks. The evidence suggested a pattern. The howlers seemed to be drawn to certain areas of the forest during the full moon. There's something in those woods, something old, and perhaps something that the howler is protecting or searching for, Mr. Thorne speculated. With a plan forming, Ellie decided to venture into the forest. She gathered a small group of willing villagers, including Mr. Thorne and a quiet, sturdy farmer named John, who had lived on the edge of the forest all his life and knew it well. They agreed to set out the following night, under the light of the waning moon, hoping to track the howler or at least find clues to its origins. As night enveloped Silverwood, the group met at the edge of the forest. Ellie felt a mix of excitement and fear. She was armed with a camera, a notebook, and a silver charm that Mrs. Dalloway had insisted she wear. The forest welcomed them with its usual chorus of sounds, but as they ventured deeper, an oppressive silence took hold. John led the way, his steps sure and silent. They moved toward the area where Ellie had first seen the howler emerge. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed alive, aware of their presence. Ellie's senses were heightened, each snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sending a jolt of adrenaline through her. After several hours of searching, they came upon a clearing. The moonlight filtered through the trees, illuminating the center of the clearing where the earth was disturbed. It looked like something, or someone, had been digging there recently. Nearby, Ellie found a fragment of what appeared to be an old, tarnished silver pendant buried under a layer of leaves. She carefully bagged it as evidence. Just then, a low growl echoed through the trees, stopping them in their tracks. The air grew cold, and the faint smell of wet fur permeated the clearing. The howler was near, watching them. John signaled for the group to slowly back away towards the forest edge. They retreated without turning their backs, hearts pounding. They made it out of the forest without a direct encounter, but the reality of their situation was clear. Whatever the howler was protecting or searching for, it was important enough to risk exposure. Back at the village, Ellie and the group discussed their findings. The pendant, the disturbed earth, and the howler's protective behavior suggested that there were deeper secrets hidden in the forest. Ellie ended the night with a new resolve to uncover these secrets. She knew the answers lay hidden in the woods of Silverwood, guarded by a creature of shadow and moonlight. Her mission was no longer just about understanding the howler, it was about uncovering a part of Silverwood's hidden history. Her next step would be to investigate the pendant and its origins, hoping it would lead her closer to the truth. The discovery in the forest ignited a fire within Ellie. She spent the next few days immersed in research, trying to unravel the history of the silver pendant. With Mr. Thorne's help, she learned it was part of a set, a collection of artifacts rumored to be linked to the founding families of Silverwood, some of whom were said to harbor ancient secrets and ties to the mystical. Ellie's next step was to approach Mrs. Whitlock, the mayor, who was a descendant of one of these founding families. Mrs. Whitlock's home was an old, stone building adorned with carvings that whispered of the old world. Reluctantly, the mayor listened as Ellie laid out her findings, the silver pendant gleaming between them. The legends speak of a covenant with the forest, a pact made to protect something very valuable, Mrs. Whitlock finally said, her voice a mix of resignation and caution. It seems you are pulling at threads that might unravel more than just the tale of a beast. Equipped with new knowledge and a sense of urgency, Ellie planned another expedition into the forest. This time, she aimed to find the remaining artifacts, hoping they would provide the key to understanding the howler's origins and perhaps a way to end the curse. Under a canopy of stars, Ellie, John, Mr. Thorne, and a few brave souls ventured back into the woods. Their path was lit by the soft glow of lanterns, their shadows dancing on the ancient trees. The forest seemed to watch them, its inhabitants silent spectators to their quest. Hours into their search, a thick fog rolled in, enveloping the group in a cold, damp blanket. Visibility dropped, and the tension among the group escalated. Every sound seemed amplified, every whisper of wind a potential harbinger of the beast. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest as she clutched the map, guiding them toward a location marked with an ancient symbol. Suddenly, the fog shifted, and a massive silhouette emerged. The howler stood at the edge of their light, its eyes glowing in eerie silver, its presence imposing and terrifying. Ellie felt a chill run down her spine, There was an intelligence in its gaze, a warning in its stance. "Show him the pendant," whispered Mr. Thorne urgently. Trembling, Ellie stepped forward, holding out the silver fragment. The beast's eyes fixed on the pendant, and for a moment, a look of recognition, or was it sorrow, flashed across its features. John, ever protective, raised his rifle, but Ellie motioned for him to lower it. "No," she said softly, her eyes locked on the howler's. "I don't believe he wants to harm us." The standstill felt like an eternity. Then, gradually, the howler stepped closer, its massive form towering over Ellie. She stood her ground, her resolve as strong as the silver chain around her neck. The beast sniffed at the pendant, then let out a long, mournful howl that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. As if the sound was a signal, the fog began to lift, and the howler retreated back into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of paw prints and a heavy, contemplative silence. The group was shaken but unharmed. They returned to the village as dawn was breaking, the night's events a surreal memory. Ellie knew they had crossed an unspoken boundary, not just geographically but spiritually. The howler was not just a creature to be feared, it was a guardian, perhaps, of Silverwood's deepest secrets. Back at her cottage, Ellie carefully placed the silver pendant on her mantle. It was a token of their encounter, a key to understanding the enigma of the howler. Her mission was far from over, but she felt a step closer to unraveling the mystery that intertwined her fate with that of the beast and the forest. The journey ahead promised more revelations, and Ellie was ready to face them, armed with courage and a growing understanding of the ancient forces at play in Silverwood. In the days that followed their eerie encounter with the howler, Ellie's mind was restless, piecing together the fragmented history of Silverwood and its spectral guardian. The pendant, a tangible link to the past, seemed to hold more significance than she had initially realized. Determined to delve deeper, Ellie decided to visit the village archives, housed in a small annex of the library where Mr. Thorne spent much of his time. Upon her arrival, Mr. Thorne greeted her with a mix of enthusiasm and concern. "I've been thinking about your discovery," he said, leading her to a dusty table scattered with old manuscripts and maps. "This pendant may be part of the original set of artifacts meant to bind the howler to the forest, or perhaps to protect something hidden within it." Together, they pored over ancient texts and family genealogies, tracing the lineage of Silverwood's founding families. It became apparent that the pendant belonged to a lineage believed to have been the forest's original guardians. "Look here," Mr. Thorne pointed to an old diary entry, faded but legible. "It mentions a locket, much like your pendant, used in a ceremony involving the spirit of the forest. It seems these ceremonies were meant to renew a pact, an agreement to protect the forest and its secrets." Intrigued and driven by a newfound purpose, Ellie decided to investigate the physical locations mentioned in the diary. She organized a small team, including John, who had proved both brave and knowledgeable about the local terrain. They prepared for a day-long trek into deeper, uncharted parts of the forest, where the diary mentioned a hidden grove, the site of ancient ceremonies. The journey into the forest was arduous. The further they went, the more the forest seemed to close in around them. Thick vines and overgrown paths obscured their way, and an eerie silence pervaded, as if the forest itself was watching, alive with anticipation. After hours of hiking, they stumbled upon the grove, which was eerily serene. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, covered in moss and surrounded by towering old trees. The air around it felt charged, a palpable tension hanging over the place. Ellie felt a shiver run down her spine as she approached the altar, the silver pendant in her hand pulsating with a strange warmth. Placing the pendant on the altar, Ellie stepped back. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft glow began to emanate from the pendant, casting light on the ancient symbols carved into the stone. The symbols matched those in the diary, confirming their connection to the old guardianship rites. As they examined the altar, John uncovered a hidden compartment beneath the surface, revealing a second artifact, a silver ring, intricately designed to complement the pendant. "It was meant to be reunited with this," Ellie murmured, feeling a sense of destiny unfolding. The discovery of the ring and the illuminated symbols gave Ellie new insights into the howler's nature and its bond to the forest. It seemed the creature was not just a protector but perhaps a custodian of the pact made long ago, bound to the forest by the ancestors of Silverwood. With dusk approaching and the mysteries of the grove partially unveiled, the group made their way back to the village. Ellie knew that the answers they found raised more questions. What was the pact? Who had made it? And what would happen now that the artifacts were being brought back together? As the forest receded behind them, Ellie felt a sense of accomplishment mixed with apprehension. She had uncovered pieces of a story that spanned centuries, a story that was not just about a beast, but about the heart and soul of Silverwood itself. Her journey was far from over, but each step brought her closer to understanding the true nature of the Howler and the deep, dark heart of the forest. After their significant discovery in the grove, Ellie and her companions returned to Silverwood with the artifacts. The village seemed quieter than usual, a reflection perhaps of the growing unease about the woods and their mysterious guardian. Ellie, however, was filled with a new resolve to uncover the truth, believing that the answers would bring peace to the village and to the tormented creature that roamed the forest. The next day, Ellie sought out the oldest and perhaps wisest resident of Silverwood, the village elder, Mrs. Winthrop. Mrs. Winthrop had lived her entire life in the village and was a direct descendant of one of the original guardian families. Her home was a small, ivy-covered cottage on the outskirts of the village, filled with antiques and old books that spoke of a long and storied past. Upon arriving, Ellie was warmly welcomed by Mrs. Winthrop, who seemed to expect her. "I heard about your findings, my dear," the elder said, her eyes bright with a mix of excitement and solemnity. "It seems you have stirred the spirits of the past, and they have much to tell us." Over cups of steaming herbal tea, Mrs. Winthrop shared the lore passed down through generations. She explained that the Howler was once a guardian spirit, transformed into its current form through a ritual gone awry, a ritual intended to protect a sacred relic hidden within the forest, a relic of great power and danger. "The artifacts you found were part of the binding ritual," Mrs. Winthrop continued, her voice low as if sharing a sacred secret. "They were used to tie the spirit to the forest, to ensure it would guard the relic. But, as time passed, the ritual was forgotten, and the bindings loosened. That is why the Howler grows restless." Ellie listened intently, absorbing every word. The historical weight of her discovery became increasingly clear, as did her role in this ancient drama. "What must be done to calm the spirit?" she asked, more determined than ever to restore balance. Mrs. Winthrop sighed, a sound of weariness tinged with hope. "The artifacts must be returned to their rightful places in the grove, and a new ritual must be performed. But it must be done correctly this time, with respect and knowledge of the old ways." Determined to see this through, Ellie asked Mrs. Winthrop to teach her the ritual. Over the next few days, they met frequently, poring over old books and practicing the ceremonial words and actions needed to complete the ritual. Ellie felt a deep connection to Silverwood's history, and with each passing day, her resolve strengthened. As the next full moon approached, Ellie prepared for what she hoped would be the final encounter with the Howler. She gathered the village's remaining guardians, those who still respected the old ways and understood the significance of what they were about to undertake. Together, they rehearsed the ritual, each step meticulously planned to ensure no further mistakes would be made. On the eve of the full moon, Ellie led the group back to the ancient grove. The forest seemed to recognize their intent, the air thick with anticipation. The group arranged the artifacts, the pendant and the ring, on the stone altar, their silver surfaces gleaming under the moonlight. As they began the ritual, the atmosphere around them shifted, the wind carrying whispers of ancient voices. Ellie felt the presence of the Howler before she saw it, a massive shadow moving at the edge of the clearing. As they continued, the beast stepped into the moonlight, its eyes watching their every move, intense but no longer threatening. Ellie, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and awe, continued the ritual, her voice steady. The Howler moved closer, its form shifting, the air shimmering around it as the ritual reached its climax. The beast's eyes locked on Ellie, a silent understanding passing between them. The conclusion of the ritual would reveal whether their efforts to mend the broken bonds of the past would bring peace to the Howler and to Silverwood, or if the shadows of ancient mistakes would continue to loom over the village. The night of the full moon arrived, cloaking the ancient grove in a luminous, silver glow. Ellie and the group of village guardians assembled in the clearing, each carrying a sense of solemn duty. The air was crisp, charged with a palpable energy as if the forest itself was holding its breath in anticipation of the ritual's outcome. Ellie, dressed in a simple white robe to symbolize purity and respect for the old ways, stepped forward to the stone altar. Beside her, the gathered villagers, some descendants of the original guardian families, formed a circle, their faces illuminated by torchlight, eyes fixed on the sacred artifacts laid out before them, the silver pendant and the matching ring. As the ritual began, Ellie took a deep breath and recited the ancient incantations Mrs. Winthrop had taught her. Her voice, clear and resonant, echoed through the trees, blending with the rustle of leaves in the gentle night breeze. The villagers joined at intervals, their chorus lending strength to the invocation meant to heal and bind. John, standing by Ellie's side, held the silver ring high, allowing the moonlight to catch its intricate engravings. He carefully placed it on a small pedestal next to the pendant, completing the set as prescribed in the old texts. The artifacts together emitted a soft, ethereal hum, a sign that the ritual was aligning with the forces they sought to appease. At the ritual's peak, the howler emerged from the shadows of the trees, its formidable presence commanding the clearing. The beast's eyes, glowing in intense silver, fixed on Ellie and the artifacts. With each step it took towards the altar, the humming intensified, vibrating through the ground like a heartbeat. Ellie continued, her voice unwavering, reaching out with open palms towards the howler. The creature paused, its head bowed slightly as if in recognition or submission to the ritual's power. The villagers fell silent, the only sounds the crackling of the torches and the whispering wind. With a final invocation, Ellie placed her hands on the artifacts, her words summoning the binding magic of old. A radiant light burst forth from the altar, enveloping Ellie, the artifacts, and the howler in a brilliant, blinding glow. The light seemed to pulse with life, expanding and contracting like a living entity. As the light faded, the group looked on in awe. The howler, once a fearsome beast, now stood transformed. The monstrous features softened, revealing a more serene, though still formidable, creature. Its eyes, previously wild with torment, now gazed at Ellie with a lucid, almost human expression of gratitude and relief. The forest around them seemed to exhale, a gentle breeze rustling through the leaves, carrying away the heaviness that had lingered over the woods for centuries. The villagers, witnessing the successful transformation and pacification of the howler, felt a collective weight lift from their shoulders, their fears dissolving into the night air. Ellie, exhausted but elated, felt a deep connection to the forest and its mysteries now revealed and respected. She had not only uncovered but also healed a fragment of Silverwood's hidden past, restoring balance where there had been discord. The ceremony concluded with the villagers leaving the grove quietly, each person reflecting on the night's profound events. Ellie remained behind, sitting by the altar, watching as the howler retreated into the woods, no longer a creature of fear but a guardian by choice, bound to protect the forest with a renewed spirit. The ritual under the moon had not only transformed the howler but had also changed Ellie. She felt a new purpose in Silverwood, not just as a teacher but as a keeper of ancient secrets and a bridge between the old ways and the new. As she walked back to the village under the light of the waning moon, she knew her life was forever intertwined with the mystical and the mysterious forces of Silverwood. The successful completion of the ritual marked a profound shift in Silverwood. The morning after, as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the dense canopy of the forest, the village awoke to a palpable sense of peace that hadn't been felt in generations. Ellie, though weary from the night's exertions, felt invigorated by a deep sense of accomplishment and connection to the village and its history. As word of the ritual's success spread, the villagers' attitudes towards the forest and its now transformed guardian began to change. Where once there was fear and suspicion, there was now respect and a renewed interest in the old ways and the balance between the village and the natural world around it. Ellie, recognized not just as the schoolteacher but as a key figure in the restoration of peace, found herself at the heart of this cultural shift. She organized meetings and discussions in the schoolhouse, where villagers of all ages came to learn about the history of Silverwood, the significance of the guardians, and the importance of the pact that had been renewed. Mrs. Winthrop, energized by the village's embrace of its heritage, became a regular speaker at these gatherings, sharing stories and insights from the past, helping to bridge the gap between generations. John, who had been instrumental in the ritual, took on the role of a guardian, leading efforts to protect the forest and ensure that the balance was maintained. As autumn deepened into winter, the village saw subtle but significant changes. Paths that once skirted the forest now wound through it, with new markers that told stories of significant spots within the woods. The howler, now a benign presence, was occasionally sighted by villagers, but no longer as a figure of dread. Instead, these sightings were taken as a sign of the forest's health and vitality, a guardian keeping watch over the natural order. Ellie found herself increasingly drawn to the forest, spending her free time exploring its depths and learning its secrets. She documented her findings and began writing a book about Silverwood's history, its myths, and the true nature of its connection with the supernatural forces that had shaped it. One crisp evening, as Ellie walked through the village, she noticed the children playing near the edge of the woods, their laughter echoing through the air, haunted by fear. Parents watched on, no longer anxious but with smiles of relief and contentment. The transformation in the community was profound, and Ellie felt a deep, fulfilling connection to these people and this place that had become her home. As the year drew to a close, the village prepared for a celebration unlike any it had seen before, a festival to honor the forest and its guardian. Lanterns were hung from trees, and tables were laden with harvest fare. Music and laughter filled the air, with Ellie at the heart of the festivities, her spirit intertwined with Silverwood's legacy and future. The festival culminated with a ceremony at the edge of the forest, where Ellie and the villagers gathered under the stars. A new plaque was unveiled, dedicating the forest as a protected space, co-guarded by humans and the supernatural alike. As they all watched, a figure appeared at the forest's edge, the howler, standing tall and serene under the moonlight, its eyes reflecting the light of the bonfires and the stars above. The sight of the creature, once feared and now revered, brought tears to many eyes, including Ellie's. In that moment, they all felt the true liberation of their village and their souls from the shadows of fear. They had not only transformed a legend but had also reclaimed their heritage and discovered a new way to live in harmony with the mysterious and the mystical forces around them. The festival night marked a new beginning for Silverwood, a chapter where old fears were replaced with new traditions, and the past's dark tales transformed into lessons of harmony and respect. As the villagers retired from the celebration, their hearts lighter and their spirits enriched, Ellie walked back to her cottage, feeling the profound peace that enveloped the village. In the days that followed, Ellie's role in Silverwood evolved naturally from a teacher of children to an educator of the community. She organized regular walks in the forest, where she shared its secrets and the importance of the balance they had pledged to maintain. These walks became a cherished activity for the villagers, blending education with the joy of experiencing the woods in their new, liberated form. Her book on Silverwood's history and transformation became a project that involved the whole community. Stories were shared by the older residents, providing first-hand accounts of the times when fear ruled their relationship with the forest. Younger villagers contributed artwork and personal reflections, turning the book into a collective tapestry of the village's journey from shadow into light. Ellie also helped to establish a small museum next to the library, where artifacts, photographs, and documents related to Silverwood's history were displayed. This museum became a focal point for visitors, who increasingly came to Silverwood, drawn by the story of its transformation and the now famous legend of the Howler. Spring brought with it a renewal of the forest itself. The trees seemed to stand taller, and the wildlife flourished, with rare birds and flowers making a comeback, as if nature itself was celebrating the peace that had been restored. The Howler, ever the silent guardian, was occasionally glimpsed at the forest's edge, a reminder of the pact that now bound the villagers to their protector in mutual respect. On the anniversary of the ritual, Silverwood held its first Guardian Festival to celebrate the pact's renewal with the forest. Ellie was asked to speak, and as she stood before her fellow villagers, she saw not just faces in the crowd, but friends and family. She talked about the journey they had undertaken, the lessons learned, and the future they envisioned. As we stand here today, we are reminded that fear should never be a barrier to understanding. We faced our fears, uncovered our history, and found ways to live in harmony with forces we once did not understand, Ellie said, her voice strong and clear. Let this festival always be a celebration of our courage, our unity, and our commitment to being guardians of not just our village but also the world around us. The festival ended with the planting of a new grove of trees, symbolizing their ongoing commitment to the forest and its legacy. Each villager, including the children, placed a young sapling into the earth, their act of planting mirroring their deeper commitment to nurture and protect. As the sun set over Silverwood, casting long shadows that danced in the gentle evening breeze, Ellie walked back through the village. The lanterns hanging from the trees bathed the path in a warm, golden light, reflecting the community's enduring spirit. She felt a profound connection to this place, a place she had come to protect, to love, and to call home. In the tranquility of her cottage, Ellie penned the final chapter of her book, a narrative of a village that had rediscovered its soul through the depths of its ancient woods. As she wrote, she felt a sense of completeness, a circle closed, yet open to the stories yet to come. Silverwood was no longer just a place marked on a map, but a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of understanding and the profound bonds between humans and the mystical world.